UFC Vegas 77 betting and DraftKings show. We have 13 fights this weekend. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. And we're going to kick things off in the women's bantamweight division as Eileen Perez comes in as a minus 200 favorite. The comeback on Ashley Evans-Smith is plus 170. And this is a matchup where we have a lot of concerns kind of on both sides, but particularly on the Evans-Smith side as she's taken almost 3 years away from the octagon. You know, part of that was due to a USADA suspension. Part of that was due to an injury. She had a major spinal surgery done. So this is the first time coming back after a long layoff and a major surgery like that. So we definitely have concerns, but it's also like she wasn't looking all that great prior to the layoff because she had previously lost 4 of her last 5 fights, didn't look great in basically any of those. So I definitely have concerns on the Evans-Smith side. Primarily, she's a boxer. You know, she wants to get inside, wants to brawl, can mix it up a little bit. Now, on the flip side, Eileen Perez hasn't really faced the greatest level of competition. You know, her only 2 career losses are to UFC level fighters, Egger in her debut and Tamaris Vidal on the regional scene. But the people that she ran through were very, very low level. She seems to be more of a grappler, okay wrestling, okay grappling, but really not technical at all. Can be reversed, can be bumped out of position, etc., etc. I just don't think that this is a good matchup for Ashley Evans-Smith, even before the long layoff and the surgery and whatnot. So it's just a spot where I'm going to lean with Perez. She's more active. I think she's still improving at this stage in her career, and I just think there's too many red flags to overlook on the Evans-Smith side. So we're going with Eileen Perez by decision. That's the official pick. Which brings us to the next fight on the card. This one's in the lightweight division, and we have another fighter coming off a lengthy absence as Alexander Munoz comes off a 2-year layoff here. He's facing Carl Deaton. He's a minus 160 favorite. The comeback on Deaton is plus 140, and this was my first bet of the week. I'm on Alex Munoz here pretty big. I bet him 3.2 units to win 2 units. I just think this is a great stylistic matchup for him. You know, he comes from a high-level wrestling background. He wrestled at Oklahoma State in college Division I. Previously in high school, he was a 2-time state champion in Texas, and he trains at Team Alpha Male, so we know he's getting good rounds in. We know they have a solid wrestling base there as well. So I expect him to use that wrestling in this matchup. You know, he's coming off a loss. Aside from the long layoff, he's coming off a loss against Luis Pena. A lot of people thought he won that fight. I thought he won that fight as well. I expect this to be more of the same, but more convincingly. As this one, it seems like he's a better technical striker. He's clearly the better wrestler, and I just trust him more than a guy like Carl Deaton, who's 0-1 in the UFC. He made a short notice debut against Joe Selecti, got submitted in the second round in that fight, and Deaton's just not a guy that I think is going to have a long career at the UFC level. His wrestling's not very good. He can give up takedowns, as we saw in his UFC debut, and I think that's going to be the key difference here. Now, Deaton isn't a complete fish on the mat. You know, he is an opportunistic submission grappler. 9 of his career wins have come by submission, so it's going to be up to Munoz to stay safe in those grappling exchanges, but I expect him to be well-rounded enough to be able to secure dominant position and stay safe on top and bank this control time, bank these rounds. And again, I think he's the better technical striker as well. So I think he has multiple ways to win this fight, and I think he gets his hand raised. We're going Munoz by decision. That's the official pick. And next matchup in the flyweight division, we have Azad Maxim, a minus 425 favorite with Tyson Nam on the comeback at plus 320. And this is one where we have this guy who's kind of a highly touted regional prospect fighting out of Kazakhstan. He's 16-0. 12 of those wins have come inside the distance. He's primarily a grappler. You know, his wrestling does look to be pretty decent. He's able to get a lot of these fights to the ground where he does his best work. A lot of wins by sub, but he's got some power as well, and his striking has really developed a long way considering, you know, over the course of his career. And on the flip side, Tyson Nam, he just kind of has one way to win fights. You know, he's 40 years old at flyweight, which isn't great. He's low volume on the feet, but he does have that fight-changing power, and that's basically been the story of Nam's career, is he has to hurt you with those hands, and if he doesn't, he's going to struggle to win rounds consistently. He's got very good takedown defense, but if you are able to force some grappling exchanges, he can certainly be had, as we saw in his last fight. So I just think Maxim has multiple ways to win this fight. I've never been big on Tyson Nam. Yes, he does have that one-shot type of power, but he's going up against a guy who I think is just going to be better than him in multiple areas. I do think Maxim ultimately gets the grappling going in some way, shape, or form. I also think he has the potential to hurt Tyson Nam on the feet. We've seen him hurt. We've seen him wobbled recently and finish. So I think Maxim gets it done inside the distance. We're going with the young prospect, and he gets his hand raised on Saturday. Which brings us to our next fight, as Evan Elder comes in as a big favorite at minus 295. The comeback on Genaro Valdez is plus 235. And originally I was like, man, Valdez is super high variance. He's got big power early. He's explosive, not the most skilled guy. I was kind of considering, this line could be a little bit wide. I've never been big on Evan Elder. He's just kind of, an okay guy. He reminds me of like an Austin Hubbard. Like, he's durable, he's tough, he's decently well-rounded, gonna mix in the leg kicks, can work the body decent, but he doesn't have a ton of power. He doesn't have really much grappling at all. He's just not a guy that I think has a bunch of upside, but I can't get there on Genaro Valdez. And the reason being is, despite him being explosive early and having the potential to hurt you early, he's going up against Elder, who's historically very durable. Yes, he technically got lost by TKO in his last fight, but that was a doctor stoppage due to the gash on his eyebrow from Nazim Sejikov, who really got lucky in that spot because Elder was up 2 rounds going into the third, and that was one where I bet Sejikov at juice, so I wasn't feeling great. Ended up scraping a win there, got lucky, and Sejikov now fights Terrence McKinney later on this card, so we'll get to him in a few minutes. But in terms of this matchup, I think the durability is just going to be the key here. Genaro Valdez, we know his cardio, yes, looked better his last time out, was able to make it to a decision. 2 of the 3 judges said he won one of those rounds, so it wasn't a complete blowout. But at the same time, like, this guy clearly fades in his fights. He's basically a round 1 finish or bust type of guy. I just don't trust the durability, because we saw him knock down 5-6 times against Matt Frevola before being finished there. And then in the follow-up fight, he got hurt multiple times. Even though he ended up making it to the bell, he was hurt to the body, hurt to the head. Like, this dude is constantly getting hurt. And yes, he's able to, push through a lot of that, work back to his feet, but I mean, it's almost like anything you land on him is going to hurt him. So I just think there's a lot of upside for Elder here, just knockdown potential, multiple knockdown potential. But I just think the durability's key, the cardio's key. So I think Elder, despite getting a little bit too much respect here, I do think he gets his hand raised, and I don't trust the durability of Valdez. So we're going Elder by TKO. That's the official pick. And next fight up in the welterweight division, we have Jack Della Maddalena. He's the biggest favorite on the card at minus 625. The comeback on Basil Hafiz is plus 420. And I'm sure I probably didn't pronounce that right, but basically the story with Jack Della is he was originally supposed to fight Sean Brady at UFC 290. Sean Brady pulled out due to a medical issue with his elbow. We ended up getting the short notice replacement, who unfortunately had a medical issue. It was actually a great story, potentially saved his life, but the fight obviously couldn't go on. And now, third time's the charm. Jack Della stayed in Vegas in hopes to get a fight this weekend, and now he's getting his wish against UFC newcomer on short notice, Basil Hafiz. And this guy is basically a grappler, decent submission grappler, a few wins by sub, seems to have okay wrestling as well, but he's just, he gasses out pretty much all of his fights. He tends to fade a little bit. I don't think he has much for Jack Della on the feet, despite coming off a knockout victory. It was the first time he's won by knockout. I don't think he has that much power. I think he's going to struggle to match the pace and really struggle with the pressure of Jack Della in that first round. I think it's only a matter of time before Jack Della ends up hurting him. I think he keeps the fight standing and ends up knocking him out in the first round. So we're going Maddalena by round 1 knockout. That's the official pick. In terms of DraftKings, he is the most expensive fighter on the slate at $9,700. We've seen DraftKings get more aggressive with their pricing on these massive favorites, and I think that's a reason why we saw Bo Nickel, who we all expected to win in the first round, only come in at 28% last week in the main GPP, which was much lower than I expected. So people do actually get a little bit of sticker shock, especially when you see multiple fighters priced above that 9K range. So even at 9,700, I think he's one of the safest options on the board. But the difference between this week and last week is last week we had 3 or 4 great 9K and above options. This week, I'm not so sure we have that many. So I actually like getting up to Jack Della while you can. I think he's the safest play on the board, and he's got probably the most upside as well. So even at a steep price tag, I'm going to have a decent amount of exposure to Jack Della this weekend. Next fight up in the featherweight division, we have Costa, a minus 205 favorite. The comeback on Austin, lights out Lingo, is plus 175. Costa, we saw make his UFC debut on short notice against Thiago Moises. That was up a weight class. He fought at 155. Now he's coming back down to his natural weight class, and he has a full camp, so we should see a better version of him. But he kind of impressed a lot of people in that spot. You know, he seemed decent on the regional scene, but he looked even better in that debut, particularly in the first round, where he was able to get off on his striking a little bit before Moises kind of implemented the grappling, where he was clearly just better than Costa on the mat, and he ended up submitting him in the second round. But I think Costa kind of overperformed expectations to a degree, and a lot of times we typically see those guys get inflated in their next fight in terms of how much the betting market respects them, and I kind of think that's what's happening here, because now he's ballooned up to plus minus 200 or higher, where stylistically, I think this is a pretty competitive matchup against a guy like Austin Lingo, who Lingo really only struggles when you implement the grappling. Costa's not much of a grappler. I think he wants to strike, fights out of the southpaw stance, wants to get off on those kicks, does have a little bit of power. 13 of his 19 wins have come by finish, but I don't think he's landing many takedowns. And even though Lingo struggles to defend them, if Costa's not going to look to implement the grappling, then I think we have a competitive kickboxing match. And Lingo is a good striker. He's been improving. He has knockout power. Most of those came on the regional scene, but you have to remember, prior to that submission loss against Nate Landwehr, he landed a knockdown against Jacob Kilburn, and he landed a knockdown in the follow-up fight as well. So he does have clear power. It just hasn't turned into a knockout at the UFC level yet, but he's a good boxer. Yes, he gets hit a little bit, but if this is just going to be a striking match, I have a hard time making Costa such a big favorite here. I think it's closer to a 50-50. I'm going to side with Austin Lingo. I trust him a little bit more. I think he's a little bit more proven, and I think Costa's just getting a little bit too much respect for my liking. So we're going Austin Lingo by decision. That's the official pick, and he's one of my favorite underdogs this week. And next up in the women's strawweight division, we have Victoria Dudukova, a minus 235 favorite, with Estela Nunes on the comeback at plus 190. And this is a matchup where we have Dudukova, who's coming off that performance on the Dana White's Contender Series this past season, where she did win by decision over Maria Silva. She came through as a sizable underdog in that spot, and I gotta say, I really wasn't expecting that. You know, I believe I actually bet Maria Silva, which doesn't look good in hindsight, but that just shows how good Dudukova did look in that fight. You know, a lot of people didn't really trust her grappling. She didn't really face much resistance on the regional scene. The level of competition was pretty low, but her wrestling, I mean, she proved in that Silva fight, her wrestling's good enough to get the fight to the ground, and she's got good control, good submission grappling as well. She loves that crucifix position. I just think she sets up well against somebody like Estela Nunes, who struggles in that area. She only defends takedowns at 53%. She's got the kickboxing. She should have a striking advantage, but the story of her career is she has not been able to keep the fight standing when she needs to. I think that is much more of the same here. I think Dudukova gets the fight to the ground, potentially submits her or wins by decision, but if that's the case, it's going to come with multiple takedowns and control time. We're going Dudukova by decision. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our featured bout on the prelims, as we have Melsik Bagdasaryan, my guy, a minus 170 favorite, with the comeback on Tucker Lutz at plus 145. And this one, it seems pretty straightforward to me. If you like the Tucker Lutz side, I think you just wait until after the first round, because Melsik, we know he's got the powerful striking. 5 of his 7 wins have come by knockout, and even if he's unable to get that knockout, he always starts fast. He always looks good in round 1, and then he fades as the fight goes on. So I expect him to win round 1 here at a very high clip. I expect him to test the chin of Tucker Lutz early, who's coming off a submission loss against Daniel Pineda, but did get dropped in that fight. So I just think you take a lot of the risk out by waiting on Tucker Lutz after a round. You know, that's typically when we start to see Bagdasaryan slow down. I like the Bagdasaryan side. I lean with him, but I'm just saying if you like Lutz, wait around and then see how it's going. Make sure he's alive for starters, and then see if Melsik starts to slow in the second round before you hop on and get a better number than plus 145. So now that that's out of the way, I do expect, like I said, Bagdasaryan to get out early. He banks round one at a high clip. He does have knockout ability, and he can finish this fight, but if he doesn't, he's historically not a great DraftKings scorer. He needs that early knockout in rounds 1 or round 2 potentially to pay off that tag, and if he doesn't get that, he's just not going to score well. So I think this one basically just comes down to how the ownership shakes out. You know, it's early in the week, but as we get closer to Saturday, I'm really going to keep an eye on ownership, because if Melsik Bagdasaryan, who I'm a fan of, I know a lot of other people are as well, if he starts to get, you know, pretty popular just because people like him as a fighter, then I'm going to look to be underweight and just fade him, because there is a lot of risk at that price tag. If he doesn't get that finish, he never looks to grapple. We know his volume starts to fade as the fight goes on. So outside of an early knockout, which I've already laid out is totally possible, outside of that happening though, he's going to fail on DraftKings. So I think if he's going to be low owned and nobody wants him, then I'll take the risk and hope that first round knockout does happen. But if not, then I'm probably going to look to come in underweight to the field. Ultimately, I do lean with him to win the fight. I think it's Bagdasaryan by decision. That's the official pick. In kicking off the main card, we have Nazim Sejikov, a minus 145 favorite, with Terrence McKinney on the comeback at plus 125. And I mentioned Sejikov earlier. You know, he kind of underwhelmed in his UFC debut against Evan Elder, but he did start to come on later in that fight. Clearly lost round 1 after getting dropped, which I thought was kind of surprising. And then round 2 was very close. I thought it was kind of 50-50. Judges gave it to Elder. Round 3, Sejikov was, you know, still moving forward. He looked to have the better gas tank, so I know he kind of got lucky with that doctor stoppage, but who's to say that he wouldn't have been able to find a finish the way that round had started if he kept up that pace and pressure? So I don't want to completely talk smack about him. You know, he does have a good gas tank. He wants to move forward. He's a good striker. He's got solid first-level takedown defense, and he's very good at working back to his feet urgently. It's very hard to control him, and I think that's just kind of a nightmare for a guy like Terrence McKinney, who, if he doesn't hurt you early, you know, we know he's going to throw everything in the kitchen sink at you. If that doesn't work, he might try and just manhandle you to the ground. But if he's going to be unable to control Sejikov, if that's the game plan, Sejikov's going to keep working back to his feet, and that's just going to make McKinney gas even faster. So this is one where McKinney's always live because of the style of fighter he is, and he's always a solid DraftKings target, because if he hits that win condition, he is going to be optimal on just about every slate, especially when he's priced as an underdog. But I just think stylistically, this is a rough matchup for him against a guy who has great cardio, who works back to his feet, who is durable. So I like Sejikov here. I think he gets his hand raised. We're going Sejikov by TKO, but I'm going to have exposure to both sides on DraftKings. And next fight up, we have Francisco Prado, a minus 120 favorite, with Otman Azatar on the comeback at plus 100. And this is another great fight to target on DraftKings, priced in that mid-range as well. I'm loving the mid-range this week, and this is a big reason why, because this is one that should be fireworks from the opening bell. Both of these guys historically are round 1 finishers, and we saw Prado against Malarkey in his UFC debut. He did lose a decision, but that was a little bit more competitive than the scorecard suggested. You know, Prado wasn't out of that fight, even in round 3 after taking a beating, getting taken down multiple times. You know, he had only ever been to round 3 once prior in his career. And in his UFC debut on short notice, even in round 3, after all of the damage he took and all of, you know, the defensive grappling, all that stuff, he's still not giving up. He's still working back to his feet. Had a Kimura attempt in deep, used that to sweep and get back to his feet. Didn't finish it, but I just think those things are encouraging when you have a guy that's so young, 21 years old. Yes, he didn't face much resistance on the regional scene. He's fighting out of Argentina, but the dude does have explosive power. I think the cardio is probably better than people are expecting, and I just think Otman Azatar is kind of an older version of Prado, whereas Prado has a lot more room for improvement from fight to fight because of how young he is and how he's just now getting started in the UFC, whereas Azatar's 33 years old. He's coming off a brutal knockout victory against Matt Frevola, and I think we've seen the best of Otman Azatar. Not that he can't win here. I think both guys have the potential to finish this fight early. Either guy can win by knockout in the first round. It wouldn't surprise me one bit, but I do favor the younger guy in Francisco Prado, who I just think is going to be the more durable fighter. I think he has the better gas tank. I think there's more room for improvements between fights as well. So I'm going to be looking to come in underweight to Azatar, but this is clearly a fight that you want exposure to on DraftKings. So we're going Francisco Prado by TKO. That's the official pick. And next up, we have Norma Dumont, a minus 145 favorite with Chelsea Chandler on the comeback at plus 125. And this is one where I'm not loving this fight for DraftKings. I do think more than likely it probably hits the scorecards here. I think this is a competitive fight. I don't think either fighter has a ton of upside unless it just randomly turns into one of them landing a bunch of takedowns, which is never impossible in the female division, and both of these fighters do have a little bit of a wrestling background, so I don't think it's impossible, but I think for the most part, I'm going to be looking to target other fighters in this price range. I am siding with Chelsea Chandler. She's young, she's green, she's only 5-1, but she impressed me in her UFC debut. Obviously, much lower competition in Julia Stoliarenko, who basically is only trying to win by armbar. Chelsea got on top of her, had some vicious elbows, and finished the fight inside the first round. But I just think the power is going to be the difference here. Norma Dumont, she's a good technical striker. She's solid defensively. She makes it hard for her opponents to get off on volume against her. But we've seen time and time again, when she does get hit clean, she gets dropped a lot. So I don't really trust her chin. I don't think she's going to come in and try to grapple with somebody who's more physical than her and probably stronger in Chelsea Chandler. I actually think Chandler might be the one more likely to land takedown. So I'm siding with the dog. It's a close fight. I lean Chandler slightly. We're going Chandler by decision. That's the official pick. And next fight up in the middleweight division, we have Jun Young Park, a minus 155 favorite. And the comeback on Albert Jurayev is plus 135. And this is a matchup where I think it's pretty clear Albert Jurayev is clearly going to look to get the fight to the ground. He averages just over 2 takedowns per 15 minutes. He comes from a high-level grappling background, and that's when he's at his best, is when he's able to take guys down, smash them on the mat, or at least control them. But I think that's going to be difficult here against Jun Young Park. Not that he won't be able to land takedowns. I think he could while he's fresh. But I think after round 1 particularly, this is going to really start to move in favor of Jun Young Park, a guy that just has a much higher work rate, a lot more output. He's a better striker on the feet. Probably not as much finishing potential, but I just think the cardio dynamic is really going to play into his favor. Jurayev, we know, is going to fade after round 1. He basically starts to turn into a punching bag. The takedowns get a lot harder. I could just see this fight, Jurayev looks good early, wins round 1, and really starts to fade with Jun Young Park taking over in the later rounds, maybe even getting a stoppage, but ultimately getting his hand raised. We're going Jun Young Park by decision. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our main event, as Holly, the preacher's daughter, Holm, comes in as a minus 165 favorite with Mayra Bueno Silva on the comeback at plus 145. And this is a matchup where I think it's very clear. On one hand, in Mayra Bueno Silva, you clearly have the fighter who's more likely to finish the fight if there were a finish. But on the other hand, you have a fighter that's clearly a better minute winner and a better round winner. And you guys have been listening to me long enough to know that I'm almost always going to side with the better round winner in terms of predicting who's going to win the fight. And I think that's just because Holly Holm has more ways to win here. She's a much better wrestler. We've seen her hold her opponents up against the cage for longer than we would like to even admit to watching, because a lot of times it plays out pretty boring. But we've seen over the course of her career, especially the last couple fights, she's really dialed in terms of the wrestling. She landed 4 takedowns in her last fight, banked a ton of control time. I could see that happening here, because where Mayra Bueno Silva is going to be the more dangerous fighter on the feet and on the mat, she hits a lot harder. Holly Holm's almost 42 years old, so even though she's been super durable over the course of her career, you never know when that chin could get checked. And Silva's a much better submission grappler. She's going to be dangerous on bottom as well with a very active guard. But the biggest thing to me is I could just see Holly Holm landing takedowns at a high rate. I could see her banking control time. And I'm pretty confident she has the better cardio as well, because Bueno Silva has faded multiple times in 3-round fights. Now with the potential to fight for 25 minutes, I have to favor the more experienced Holly Holm, who's been in this spot before. She's proven she can do it. She has the wrestling pedigree. She has that skill set. I just think it's going to be Holly Holm by decision if she can avoid getting finished here by Marena Silva. So the way I'd look to bet it is if you have access to books with finish only markets, I think that's the way you bet Marena Silva. I haven't looked at what those prices are yet. Or maybe you take a prop shot on Holly Holm by decision. Either way, I think Holly Holm probably gets her hand raised here. She's just got to stay safe. It's Holly Holm by decision. That's the official pick. And as always, guys, fightnumbers.com will have my DraftKings player rankings. It'll have ownership projections as well. It's completely free. I'll pin it in the comments. Thank you guys for watching. I definitely appreciate it. Best of luck, and we'll see you guys next time.